Hey everybody, it's Krissa and this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. Today I have Ayelet Fishbach. She is the Jeffrey Breckenridge Keller Professor of Behavioral Science and Marketing at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She's an expert on motivation, which is something I find endlessly fascinating. And she just wrote her first book. I think it came out at the end of last year. Is that true?
Yes.
Get It Done. I still have to hold it up for some reason. I still find this really gratifying. I do really love the cover. I think about cover design a lot and how challenging it is to convey an entire book in an instant with a visual graphic. And I think it's great. It really caught my eye. The subtitle is Surprising Lessons from the Science of Motivation. And so thank you so much for doing this with me today to talk a little bit about goal setting and actually getting things done. I think a lot about this in my life, about why I can know what the right decisions are and what I want, but somehow the sort of path to doing them is really difficult. And I feel like in the book, you really, the biggest thing that I took away, not to like start with that, was that it's not actually about willpower, but more about changing your situation and changing your surroundings to sort of help facilitate making things easy and exciting to accomplish the things that you set up for. So welcome. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
And thanks for having me, Carissa, and thanks for all my idea. Starting with forget about willpower, because you just saved me a speech that I could have given. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you about it later. So keep that speech in your head. But I think that if it's okay to start out, I'm always really fascinated by like early exposure and how people kind of get interested. I think in a lot of interviews I don't know if it's behavioral economics or psychology where they talk about me search. But I think the angle that I'd like to ask you this question is sort of like, what do you think early experiences or exposures kind of helped maybe subconsciously steer you in the direction of psychology and the science of motivation?
Yes, I'm a social psychologist, and I like that you mentioned the me search. We often talk about the me search as something that we're trying to avoid, but we also recognize that our experiences made us interested in the topics that we are interested in and maybe get to certain insights. And as someone who studies motivation as something that relies on the power of the situation, we are trying to motivate ourselves by changing our situation. The situation determines whether we can do something well or not. I very much refer to my own life. I grew up in a different country at a different time. I grew up in Israel in the 70s and the 80s. I grew up in a small socialist community at kibbutz. I am now, for many years, at the University of Chicago, which is basically where we study capitalism and where we could not be more different than how I grew up. And that really gives me some breadth of like seeing how much the situation determines what you can do and how much, if you want to do something, you need to change something around you. Okay? You need to make it more possible.
Do you think you could talk a little bit about the specific sort of environment, socialist environment? Because I think for me, from the sort of like Western capitalist gaze, it's really difficult to imagine existing in a society where no one owns anything. And I think it's also really fascinating when we think about how our environments sort of shape our options, how you are able to kind of move, how you are strongly motivated, how you changed the situation for yourself, I guess you could say. Or I think
yes,
pulling up hair. There's an example you use, pulling yourself out of the muck with your own hair.
Yeah, I talk about motivation, like the concept of motivation in basically when you try to motivate yourself, you're just pulling yourself by your own hair. But in terms of my experiences, just to give a few examples, some things I actually took from the way I was brought up. So I grew up with not having any ownership of anything. So I did not own my toys or my clothes or basically anything. It was all owned by the community, and you would wear in the morning whatever clothes were available that were your size. That has changed over the years, and as I grew up, that actually was the time in history where the community has changed. But it was definitely something that stick with me. I still don't care about stuff. Carissa, if we ever meet, please don't bring me stuff because I don't know what to do with stuff. And I took that with me. Other things which were very much how I grew up have changed quite a bit. I grew up in a society where education was not a big thing, was not emphasized. We were supposed to be the new generation of farmers. We would walk the land. We would create a country in a new way, and I don't really care about any farming activities. Never cared for it. Sounds nice in in the romantic sense of just like envisioning being close to nature, but I actually like being close to books, and so I change, and something that seemed quite hard where I grew up seemed very natural where I am today, where reading books and writing books and spending your day just reading and studying is the most natural thing to do when you're a professor, and so hard to do when you're not.
It's true. I think maybe let's talk a little bit about, so I think maybe if you could describe kind of how the book is organized and kind of where the spirit of the book kind of originated, because it's 20 or 20 years of research, your research kind of, how do you sort of distill that into, I think is there 4 or 5 sections?
There are 4 sections, and so now we are jumping ahead to a much later time in my life, which is which is good. Okay, so like a couple of years ago, when I was basically sitting to organize the knowledge on motivation. By then, I've been the president of the Society for the Science of Motivation, and I've been doing research in motivation for a bit over 20 years, and my initial goal was just to like put things in order, okay, just like organizing this very messy room with like many full ideas that just like been like disorganized in my head. But what I discovered, and that was really the exciting and fun part of writing the book, what I discovered is that the order is sensible, and it has something beautiful on its own. It's actually something that can be useful. Basically, what I discovered is that if you take the research that we have done on motivation, it falls into 4 basic categories, which we can think of each one of them as an area where you can influence yourself, when you can motivate yourself. And the first one is setting a goal. So we have interventions on how to choose the right goal for you, to put a number on it, to make it intrinsically motivating, use incentives. The second part is how to sustain motivation. So you set a goal, okay? You know you want to start exercising, or to start a company, you want to start a family. Now you need to do it, okay? Now you need to sustain the motivation in the process. And this is about looking back and looking ahead and learning from feedback. And how do you stay on task? The third part is about managing multiple goals, which is actually where I started my career as a motivation scientist, trying to understand how people resolve goal conflict. So whether it's self-control conflict, you want to do this but not that, or a conflict where you just try to find the right balance between work and family, between leisure and saving money. This is an area where we have a lot of interventions that we developed as a field to help people navigate multiple goals. And then the last section is the social aspect. And actually, we have less research on this, but over the last 10 years, we've been doing more. And this refers to how we do things with others and in the presence of others. And basically, how do you choose your role models? How do you work as a team? How do you do things with the other people in your life?
Oh, that's a pretty amazing summary of everything. I think if it's okay, can we dig into each of the sections a little bit with a few questions? And let's start. I know this seems like going back in time, but can we start with um, intrinsic motivation? And maybe if you could start by defining what intrinsic motivation is and extrinsic motivation, because I think that for me, reading the book actually changed how I understand it as well. But yeah, what is intrinsic motivation, and why is it something maybe we should cultivate?
Yes, intrinsic motivation is a confusing concept. So I'm glad to hear that reading the book may have changed your mind about it or understanding of what it is in the first place. It's very important. I think you knew that before reading my book. But intrinsic motivation is defined as pursuing something as an end in itself. Okay? Is that the enjoyment, the satisfaction, the learning, okay? The feeling that you get from doing the thing, okay? The rewards that you are getting from doing the thing, which are often separated from what you are getting from completing a goal. Okay, so take your job. Okay, you might be interested in what you're doing. You might be excited to do that, and this is the intrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation is what you get out of it, which in your mind is separated, which might be separated in time. Okay, like first you'll do your job, and by the end of the month you might get paid, or by the end of the year you might be able to reflect back and look at what you have achieved. It's separated. The intrinsic motivation, that the feeling that what you're doing right now is good, it feels right, is the main predictor of persistence. Okay, what gets people out of bed and into whatever they need to do, exercising, studying, working, and so we care to increase intrinsic motivation. And I think that what is a little bit confusing is that we care to increase intrinsic motivation for goals that are not quite purely intrinsic. Okay, so,
Exactly.
right?
That's
Like,
where it gets so tricky.
exactly. So, like exercising. I don't know about you, but for me, like, it's not purely intrinsic. Okay? I, in a large part, exercise because I want to be healthy in the long run. And yet I need to make it intrinsically motivating. That is, I need to make it fun at the moment. Okay, work. It's really hard to work with something that is boring. Okay, you need to find the interest. You need to bring in some immediate rewards. And so, we have a study in which we go to school, and these were like kids in middle school, and we bought them like color pencils and music and snacks to math class. Okay, we made math into a party. Okay, now what are we doing? Okay, in a way, we are trying to increase the intrinsic motivation to study by just making the whole event, okay, the class, something that is just fun to do, that is engaging, that is unusual, that is a bit surprising when you watch TV, when you exercise, or listen to music when you walk, which, by the way, I cannot do, but
Why
other
not?
people are doing. It distracts me.
Oh,
But I know, no, I have family members to do that, so I know it works. We are basically bringing something to the activity to make it more intrinsically motivating. And let me say that, like, I think of one of the most convincing studies that we ran to show why this matters so much looked at New Year's resolutions. No one set a resolution that is purely intrinsic. Okay, no one sets a resolution to eat more ice cream. Okay, but when you measure how intrinsic is the resolution, okay, how much you will feel good doing it, that predicts whether people will stick to it in March and June, and then all the way to the following November.
I think it's so tricky too to figure out. I think it takes a lot of work to sort of pay attention to your body, and your enjoyment, how you enjoy things in the moment. And I think, at least for me, I was trained purely evaluating my life on sort of extrinsic factors. So it seems like a very daunting task. And on the onset, like you said, everybody sort of understands the term intrinsic motivation, but like when you really dig into it, actually locating what that is, I think can be a bit tricky. Going back to sort of setting goals, or setting your sights on things, you talk a lot about approach goals and avoidance goals, and sort of there are times when it's better. Can you maybe define what you mean when you define goals as goals that you approach versus goals that you label as avoidant?
It's basically your do's and don'ts. Okay? And if I can use the New Year's resolution that we look at every New Year, do you plan to do more at work, to eat more healthy food? All these are approach goals, or to avoid unhealthy food, or to make sure that you are not losing your job, which is an avoidance goal.
So why do you speculate that approach goals might be more motivating, and are there circumstances where avoidance goals actually might be more helpful in helping you stay motivated?
Yeah, so basically we have data showing that approach goals are generally more motivating. Now, generally, because some people are actually more likely to respond to avoidance goals than others, but as a general rule, approach goals are more intrinsically motivating. People are more excited about them. Avoidance goals have a couple of problems with them. One is that how do you know you are successful at whatever you set up to do? You ask yourself, okay, am I doing it right? Okay, so let's say you decided that you're going to quit smoking. How do you know you're successful? You ask yourself, okay, have I been smoking? Now you bring back to mind the thing that you're trying to avoid. Okay, and so to monitor progress or success on avoidance goals, you have to bring the thing that you're trying to avoid to mind, which makes it hard. And the other reason why avoidance goals are problematic is that we tend to be rebels. When we know that we are not allowed to do something, it's the thing that we want to do. It's kind of like one part of us really wants to do the thing that we were told not to do. Okay, you tell yourself don't drink alcohol, and kind of tempted to break this rule.
Wait, can we
Yeah.
pause there for a second? And can I ask you what your theory on why that might be, humans wanting to focus on the things that we're told we shouldn't focus on or don't want to focus on? And then also, if you think this is like pretty general across the board, across cultures, if that's just sort of like a human thing.
Yeah, well, so we call it psychological reactants, and we actually know it since the 1960s. Whether everybody has the same strength of psychological reactants, no. Adolescents have it more than adults, and also
That makes
more
sense.
than little children, right? So, like when you tell someone who's 15-year-old not to do something, you know that their desire to do it is going to be pretty high. Okay, maybe by the time they turn 30, that's going to be less of a temptation. And nonetheless, it's pretty basic for us as humans. We are curious. We are kind of testing the boundaries. Let's think about like something simple. I don't know, like your physician asks you whatever, like don't wash your ears for a week. I don't know why. Just invented some medical condition. Don't wash your ears. Now you want to wash your ears. Okay. Now you want to get water there. Okay. And it's really as basic like when you had no desire to do that. Okay. But once I said no, you're not allowed to do that, and you think, oh, it would feel nice. I want to break that funny rule that Ayelet just made up.
For some reason, I feel like as a child, I feel like I labeled myself like not necessarily bad, but like not a rule follower. And I'm just so curious if there are actually people out there who are like, respond to the statement like, don't wash your ears by like, oh, I really don't want to wash my ears. It's just
Yes, yeah. So Michelle Galfin talks, but she's a cultural psychologist, and she talks about cultures where there are more breaking the rules and other cultures where people follow the rules more. And so you can see that like the US is more of a rule breaker. Like people in Singapore are more of a rule followers. By the way, people in Eastern Europe are the most like rule breakers of everyone.
why?
And she doesn't say why.
Oh,
Just
sorry.
yeah, like just don't tell them not to whatever wash their ears. Okay? They like to break rules more than anything. Also, that more high social economic status. People are more of rule breakers. People that are poor tend to follow the rules more, and then you can explain maybe in terms of consequences that if you have the resources, then the consequences of breaking the rules are less severe for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so the more you have the resources, like if you think, I don't know, if you get a parking ticket and you can pay it and your life will not change, then you are more prone to say whatever. No, there are rules, but I do whatever I want to, and then
That's
people with less resource. So, yeah.
Stressful to think about on so many levels. I think kind of going back to your book, can you talk a little bit about goal agency and why it's important to feel like you have some control over your goals and actually setting your own goals versus other people setting your goals?
So research on goal setting finds that people are more committed to the goals that they have set. And in particular, when you put a number on the goal, okay, so we refer to this as targets, which is usually like how much and how soon. Okay, so I will like finish this project by the end of the week. I will exercise for 30 minutes, every day or so on. When we put these numbers ourselves, we are much more committed, which means that even when you try to set a goal for another person, okay, give them the number, set them the goal, it's better if they are involved. It's better to have a conversation and do it together, because you're going to be much more committed to the numbers that you decided on than somebody else's numbers.
I think about this sort of distress I have in my life, wanting to control things in a sort of uncontrollable universe. And it seems like, I don't know why it's so tempting to have to feel that sort of agency. I'm not saying that last week, actually, I interviewed a woman, the sunny nihilist, on nihilism. And so it's interesting to think about this in the context of nihilism. But I kind of want you to talk a little bit. That reminds me of this in contrast to, you studied a lot about failure. And so it's interesting for me to think about why it's important for you to set your own goals, but also in failing, it sort of changes things a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about like learning from your failures versus learning from other people's failures, and how failure is important in getting things done?
So I like your connection, how getting from setting the targets to learning from failure, because you are going to fail many times, and you're going to set optimistic targets that are meant to motivate you and then not quite getting there, or you're going to try things that just don't work, and failure is part of life, right? It is part of learning. It is part of moving somewhere, taking the wrong path. And what is interesting is that people are really struggling learning from these experiences, and they're struggling in like two opposite ways. Okay, one is that they don't learn anything. Okay, so now I gave the wrong answer and I don't learn the right answer. Okay, I don't learn that if it's not this, then it has to be that. Okay. The other thing is that what I learn is the wrong lesson. Okay, so instead of learning how to do it, I learned that I'm bad at it. Okay, so I burned the fish, and instead of learning that I should bake it for less time, I learn that I'm a bad cook. Okay, just don't try again. And we see both the like the absence of learning or learning that you just don't have the ability instead of just effective learning, which is, well, if you cooked it too much time, that means that you need to cook it for less time. If the answer is not this, then it must be that. If one way did not work, then we have to try another. And you mentioned learning from others. What is interesting is that many times what prevents us from learning is the emotional barrier, is the ego that is being hurt. Which means that when we watch another person, we can learn from their failures. Okay? When they tell us about something that did not work out, we can learn from that because it doesn't hurt our ego. Okay? It's not me who slipped on the banana, it's you. So we see these effects, which are kind of interesting. And this is research with Lauren Nesquist Winkler now at Northwestern, where when we ask people what is the correct answer and they guessed wrongly, they don't learn that the correct answer is the other one. But when they watch another person making the wrong guess, they do learn what is the correct answer, which suggests that they can infer that it's not this way, that it has to be the other way, except that when it's about them themselves, they are too hurt and too defensive to actually engage in the
It's so
process of learning.
counterintuitive.
Yes, in particular because usually people learn better from their own experiences. So there is like we see in schools now that we have a lot of hands-on learning. It makes sense. Kids learn better when they do it themselves, but not from failure.
Yeah, it's I kind of want to talk a little bit about intuition and this sort of, I want to trust it, but I think a lot of your book questions the power of intuition. Is intuition something you think a lot about?
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. It's not that intuition is wrong. People have intuitions that are at least somewhat right. Sometimes we learn the wrong intuition. Okay, so let's use the example of like eating healthy food. Okay, clearly it's in our evolution to be attracted towards food that will not kill us. Okay, so our intuition is pretty good, but it was messed up by the last 50 years or so of modern marketing that taught us to maybe favor the things that are not good for our health. And so we need to fix our intuition. Another thing is that your intuition is going to be more accurate the more you actually learn the facts from the behavioral science. Okay? And so your intuition, Carissa, is someone who's reading the behavioral science is more accurate than as another person's intuition who has never learned anything. And so it's okay to use your intuition. This is how you basically apply knowledge to a new domain, but learn. Okay.
No, it's a tricky
develop. Yeah.
Definitely things are always more complicated than they seem, and also our understandings of what intuition is and how it's formed, I feel like probably are not necessarily in alignment all the time. I think the thing, going back to kind of the original, wait, actually, no, let's talk about the glass half full. And enter into how we think about, because when I think about this, the sort of old, is it an idiom? Or like how we assess people on if they're optimists or pessimists, we have this image in our mind of a glass half full and how do you see it? But you kind of use the metaphor in a different way in the book. Can you talk a little bit about your glass half full reinterpretation?
Yes, it is a slightly different way. Okay, I basically look at two ways of monitoring progress. Okay, do you look back at what you've done or look ahead at what is remaining? So you decided to, let's say, exercise 5 times this week. Okay, do you look back at how many times you've already exercised, or do you look ahead and what is still missing? Okay, you're pursuing some advanced degree. Do you look back, or do you look ahead? And the general rule is that for novices, and if there is a midpoint, that is, it's an all or nothing goal with like a clear end state, then up to the midpoint, look back at the glass half full. Look at what you've done so far. You've done 10%, 20%, up to 50%. And only then, and when you feel like you're the expert, feel like you know what you're doing, you're committed, you can switch to looking ahead and say, I still have 40% to go, 20% to go. I'm almost there. And so the glass half empty is how you monitor progress once you're committed beyond the midpoint.
I think it's tricky because when I think about how I've coped and trained myself, it's to look at the glass half empty at the beginning. And I feel like also, if I think about what it would have been like to have had feedback from teachers, positive in the beginning, if I had the feedback sort of structured for the first half being sort of positive and the second half using maybe more of a critical lens, how that might have been motivating. And it makes so much sense, or like it feels really, really true. I think there's a moment of, I think in a few times in the book, you use the word committed, and how sort of commitment changes a goal. At what point do you, well, maybe let's take this a step back, and think about, so I have a difficult time. You always think about, you have one goal at a time and you are pursuing that one goal. But in the book, you talk about how actually we're actually holding multiple goals at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about why it's not actually the case that we're working with one goal, and how to sort of manage multiple goals, and why that might be helpful in actually completing goals?
Well, we wish often that we had fewer goals, but we always have several things that we want to achieve, and it could be on the very like abstract, broad level. What do you want in life? And people don't want just one thing. People don't say, I just want my career to be successful. They also want to travel. They want to be happy with their family. They want to explore new areas. And so it just on the abstract level, people want multiple things, but also on the very specific, everyday goal pursuit. Okay? Like every lunch decision is a compromise between different goals. Okay? Like you want to have something that tastes good and that is at least somewhat healthy, and that it's not too expensive, and it's not going to take you an hour to get it. So they're basically several goals that all simultaneously influence your choice in everything that you are doing. And now the psychologist Wilhelm Hoffman asked people about just the experience of temptation, okay? Like things that you want to do, but you know you shouldn't. And for like about 30% of their time, people could report that there is something that they are trying to suppress, that they don't want to do. Which is just like one type of multiple goals. It's the self-control conflict, and people so frequently experience that. And that to me suggests that we need to be thinking about how to pursue multiple goals and not just recipes for a single thing.
I think you talk a bit in the book about compromising and when to prioritize. And so I think that that's where the sort of it gets messy and dirty for me. Are there any sort of techniques or specific examples that come to mind that sort of illustrate this, maybe the way that we should think about, not should, but think about knowing what battles to pick, I guess you could say?
Yeah, so the decision whether to compromise, whether to stick to compromise or to prioritize is between you and your goals, right? It's like, what do you want to do? Okay, do you want to put one on top of the others, or do you want to do everything together? Do you want to no, and now put your family ahead of your career and maybe quit your job, just do the minimum necessary, or vice versa. Okay, put your career ahead of your family, or do you want to look for a compromise to make everything work? Once you made this decision, and once you're aware of what you're trying to achieve, then if you are in a prioritization world, okay, if you're thinking about two goals where one overrides the other, that's a self-control conflict. And now what you need to do is probably make decisions in a bulk. Okay, so let's say you prioritize saving money over getting the most delicious food in the best restaurants in town. And you probably want to think about your dining expenses for the month. Okay, just make a decision in advance that enables better self-control. If you are thinking about compromising, now you want to think about, well, should I alternate? Okay, sometimes I'll eat somewhere expensive, other times I'll go for something cheaper. Are you going to compromise within a single choice, which is my lunch example, getting something that is like not too expensive, but also doesn't compromise your desire to have a great experience. And like all these are strategies that people use, and they often use them intuitively. What they sometimes don't do is that, like the initial step, deciding what is it that you're trying to do here. Are you trying to prioritize or compromise? And are you applying the right strategy for where you want to be?
I think it's tricky. My partner and I have like conflicting strategies in the sense, in that he really likes, or he lives by the motto, don't do anything if you're not going to do it perfectly. And I live by the motto, good enough.
Yeah.
Which at a lot of times, if we can figure out, I think both are problematic, but both are useful in different situations. When I think about good enough, I think about compromising. When I think about do everything perfectly, I think about prioritizing. I wanted to kind of talk about another place where I feel like so many people get upset or get stuck is during the process of completing a goal in the middle. And you have, I think, really interesting ways of thinking about how to work through the middle. Because the beginning seems really fun and exciting and inspiring, and the end seems like, oh, I'm just so close. I can feel it. Why do you sort of explain that people get stuck in the middle, and what can they do?
We call it the middle problem. And it basically the phenomenon where you started with enthusiasm, and then you lost steam, okay, and you're no longer committed. And if there is an end, okay, then we'll see another increase. Okay, when people are approaching the end of something, they are increasing their efforts. The reason is that we tend not to pay attention to actions in the middle. Okay, so we remember beginnings and ends. Okay, we don't quite remember what happens in the middle, and we don't think it reflects on ourselves in the same way as the beginning and the ends. And all this leads us to kind of forget about our goal, forget about our standards. Also, for many goals, okay, we start with enthusiasm, and then we kind of even forget that we have the goal, and it's out of mind, and therefore doesn't quite influence our behavior. The solution is kind of simple once you realize the problem. Have short-term goals. Okay? That is, take the long-term goal and break it into short-term goals. And I gave before the example of a weekly exercise goal. Now, no one wants to just exercise for a week. So what does it even mean, a weekly exercise goal? Obviously, my exercise goal goes beyond the week and the month and the year. The reason that people choose to frame it in terms of a week is that there is not much of a middle. Okay? It's the beginning and then it's the end. Okay? Whereas if I thought about it as a year, that would be problematic. Now, that might be intuitive, but now let's think about saving for retirement. And that's a really long-term goal. And if you think about saving to retirement as something that you start in your 20s and end in your 60s, well, the middle is way too long. And so people may want to think about saving for retirement on a yearly basis, okay, or on a monthly basis, making these sub goals so that there is less of a middle.
No, I mean, I think again, it seems obvious, but also the reminder of how to make the middle shorter, I think is super useful. I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to touch base on the sort of last section because I think it's something that, at least for me, I often overlook when I'm trying to kind of reach my goals. I think about it as sort of like a independent pursuit, and maybe that's just again because I'm was raised in the United States of America and have this sort of strong individualist sort of cultural undertones. But I think it's really interesting to think about how the people we surround ourselves sort of affect what we do, and how their choices also consciously and subconsciously are kind of drivers. Can you talk a little bit about maybe this idea of, or why we're drawn to people who maybe have similar goals as we do, and why that isn't necessarily, in the past when I thought about it, it seemed sort of like, I don't know, icky in a way, like, oh, I'm there's sort of a negative connotation, I guess, in my mind to it, but I think it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I also think it's a really useful lens for helping us achieve the things that may be good for us in our lives.
Well, let me start by saying that I think the part of the bias, well, could be that this is most of the research coming from the Western world. It's also like this is the research is often about individual goals. So someone like you, Carissa, or me, if we just read the research, we get this idea that motivation is about how you get yourself to complete an academic degree or eat less food or excel at work or do all these things by yourself, okay, not as a team and not in the presence of others, because there's just less research on it. It has not been the focus until recently, but this is changing, which is the good news. And then there is the question of what is the relationship between relationships and goals? And you correctly noted that we are creeping close to us the people that help us with our goals. They might be our inspiration, our role models. They might be the people just like do it with us. They might be the people that encourage us to do it. And we move away from people that are no longer useful for our goals. Whether that sounds a bit too strategic, I don't know. I don't think that it's strategic. I mean, I know it's not strategic. It's often subconscious. We could use it strategically to get closer to people. Okay, we could realize that if we can make a person helpful for our goals, we would feel closer to them. I'm being reminded of my neighbor many years ago who told us that the way for her to keep the grandparents in their grandchildren's lives, that is to keep her parents in her children's lives, was by always making them useful. Okay, and they basically they give them jobs. Okay, don't come to me and be the guest, and I will just make it as comfortable as possible for you. Come to visit me, and I will give you work. Okay, you'll help me raise the grandchildren. And and she was right. She did not read the research, but she was right that yes, grandparents that are useful are feeling closer to the grandchildren, who feel closer to them. We are drawn closer to those who help our goals. Relationships break when the other party is no longer a part of your goals.
Yeah, I don't know why. There's something. What do you think is the? I think it feels like I want relationships to have this sort of like existential bond that goes beyond usefulness and just enjoyment out of pure existence at the same time in each other's lives. But I mean, and I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think a lot of times it's probably both, a combination. But I think you talk a bit about, this is a little bit tangential, but I think related, the selection of these people and selection of role models, and why it's sort of important to maybe be a little bit more mindful, because a lot of times I think that we're just sort of like using subconsciously sort of floating around, being attracted to the things that we're attracted to, and not really kind of thinking about the underpinnings of why we might be attracted to those people and things.
Oh, no, I want to try again to explain why I don't think that this is cynical or like instrumental. It's really, as people, we evolve to work with other people, to be in a social group. Okay, we connect to people because we do things together, because we help each other. And I don't think that there is anything here that we should be frowned upon. I will tell you another story. My daughter was visiting her college professor, who was basically about to die. Okay, so she was very sick of cancer, and that was the last time that they are going to meet together. And so they sat together for a few hours, and that professor was giving my daughter the list of books that she thinks my daughter should read. And I thought that was a beautiful example of how we're in this relationship where you don't have much time in the world, and the relationship is clearly ending. You are still helpful. Okay? You are giving useful advice. Okay? You are seeing the person in front of you and helping them with their goals. And my daughter was massaging her back, which was her way to be useful in the situation. And that was beautiful relationship. There was nothing that would make me feel sarcastic about it.
I think that in some ways, not to like make it about me and my understanding uh, of what useful is, and how our different understandings of worth. I think that basically, I think for me, coming from a conceptual art background, and not, I really love this sort of judgment. There's a way that I feel like you're looking at it that's judgment free, in a way that I'm looking at it that creates a value judgment on something being good or bad. That's not or like specifically good or bad. It just sort of is. I think when thinking about, like, when I relate this to conceptual art, doing something, being friends with someone just because you want to get a show or something like that, seems messy in sort of in some ways, if I frame it that way. But if I think about it as like being friends with someone because they're inspiring, or because I'm excited about the projects they're doing, seems less frowned upon. And I think that the intersection of motivation, like the intersection of my values in that situation, is not necessarily helpful, or it's not actually seeing what is, I guess I should say. I really like this, the situation that you presented with your daughter and her professor, and having, I don't know. Yeah, I see this too also, as a way that I judge my own actions, and not it clouds being able to just accept them as information. Ayelet, thank you so much we're totally out of time, for going over with me. I'm really excited to hear more about the sort of social research in how motivations work and what motivates us coming up in the future. Is there anything that in this moment is really sort of you're excited about or inspiring you to kind of get up in the morning and keep going and keep studying?
Oh, my research, my co-authors, my students, there's always a feeling that like the most interesting work that you're about to do is you're about to do it. Okay, the most interesting work is the work that you're about to do. Okay, so that's like if I can just like run this like next few studies, I will discover something really important, and this is kind of like that. Now, what keeps moving me, I'm very curious to know what they will find.
Are you studying anything specifically right now that is like, oh my gosh, this is the best research of my life? Not that it has
Oh,
to be.
yeah, I kind of have, it's, I'll mention one thing. I don't know, like there are a few things that we're doing. I'll mention one thing. We are looking at how much people see their goals as aligned with each other, or they perceive coherence between their goals. And we see there is greater well-being when you can see how the different aspects of your life and your different goals help each other. And so we are trying to understand who thinks about their goals as more coherent and like why. And it's pretty exciting.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking your time to meet with me, for writing Get It Done, and for keeping going, and trying to help people. I think going back to when we started about sort of reframing this not being a willpower problem, but a change in your environment and experience, to kind of get things done, I think is a really foundationally important reframe. I guess it really hit home. So thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Carissa. Thanks for having me.